3 more games and 3 more opportunities to get yourself to the promised land, but the waiver wire is looking barer than ever. Don't worry though, we've got all those waiver ads to get you to that fantasy title on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down and the Waiver Wire show for week 12. As always, I'm continuing to do Movember. Please consider donating at the link down below if that's something that is important to you and you're interested in men's mental health. Now, it would also be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. And if you've got any questions or comments, pop them down below or hit us up on Instagram or on Twitter. Happy to help you out there as we move towards the fantasy playoffs. And hopefully you're in a good spot with your fantasy teams. But if not, we've got plenty of good waiver wire ads. So let's get into it for week 12. I'm going to start things off with the quarterbacks. And Brock Purdy looked good first week back, and he's a very solid ad that's available in about half of leagues. I wouldn't get overexcited with him, but if you're struggling at quarterback or dealing with injuries, he is someone that's going to be hopefully more reliable down the stretch. Jaden Daniels also has been dropped in a whole lot of leagues and continues to be dropped, despite the fact that he hasn't even been put on an IR and could easily be back in a couple of weeks' time. He could easily be a league winner in the last couple of weeks he can get right. Certainly worth benching in leagues. This is the type of time in the season where you want upside on your benches, and it's a lot harder to access the upside of long shots. Someone like Daniels, all he needs to do is get healthy, and you know he's going to be a solid fantasy starting option. Joe Flacco, for me, is still someone that I'd want to start next week. New England is a team that you want to attack through the air, and Flacco is someone who we know can throw the ball and will willingly do so a lot. I can't imagine there's going to be as much running against the Pats. I think this is going to be more of a Flacco game. And Jacoby Brissett set the record for the most completions ever last week, and now takes on the Jaguars, who are a top 2 matchup for quarterbacks. This seems like a pretty great situation to me. He's another good option to pick up for this week that's available in a lot of leagues. Running back wise, and Emmanuel Wilson is the name on everyone's lips. Don't really know what's happening with Josh Jacobs. Could be out, not at all. Could be out for just a week, or could be out till the end of the season. We just plain don't know. For that reason, Wilson, for me, is someone that you absolutely have to pick up. Now, to be fair, you've been watching my stashes and stuff for the last couple of weeks. You already would have picked him up because he was one of the names that I put on this exact show last week. But if you didn't do that, he is someone that is worth picking up despite the below average matchup against the Vikings next week. Tyron Tracy is a fine starting option despite the poor matchup against the Lions. He's at least getting a reasonable amount of volume and seems to be the receiving back. That means in a PPR league, especially in what's likely to be a losing effort, he is someone that is worth rostering, especially if Jackson Dart is back. Sean Tucker was great, but now gets a tough matchup against the Rams, and you have to feel like Bucky Irving's got to be pretty close since he never even got put on IR. Tucker is someone that's worth picking up, but in a PPR league, he's risky because he's still not really getting third down and 2-minute drill work. That means you're not going to get as much receiving work. That going to Rashad White. And while White can't be trusted for touches, Tucker, although he's getting more of the touches, in what could easily be a losing effort, could have a very quiet game, and that makes him very risky. Having said that, if you're looking for a starter because of bye week issues, you can definitely do worse than Tucker. And Trey Benson, someone who, like Jaden Daniels, I want everyone picking up. Even if he gets back from injury very late on and you only get a week or 2 of him, he's still going to be the kind of guy that can win you a league. So he's someone that I definitely want to be rostering, even though I'm not expecting him back immediately. Going a little bit deeper, and Devin Singletary, preferably a non-PPR or half PPR guy, but even in a PPR league, does seem to be getting the goal line work. Don't know that I love starting him against the Lions, but there are going to be matchups where you feel good about them around the goal line. Jackson Dart being back does mean that I think we'll see a little bit less Singletary around the goal line than you would with someone like a Jameis Winston, but I still think Singletary is someone that's worth picking up in a deeper league. Chris Rodriguez, likewise, is leading the committee with Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. If you're going to have one of those two, it's probably Rodriguez, although I don't love either of them, especially because McNichols is still taking the receiving work and he's got a bye this week. But in a deeper league, really any starter needs to be rostered. Kenny Gainwell looked like he might be an interesting situation with Jaylen Warren potentially injured, but it looks like Warren's probably going to be okay. I'd still pick him up just in case, but I think Warren's probably going to be fine. Gainwell did seem to go back to getting the receiving work this week, and there certainly are going to be some games down the stretch where you expect them to be trailing, especially with Aaron Rodgers potentially injured and out, and that could mean a lot of Gainwell. That means he's worth picking up, especially in PPR leagues. And Tajay Spears, again, another PPR guy. Don't really love him or Tony Pollard, but given how their play has been, where Spears is still getting more touches because they're losing most of the time, and even in a pretty close game on the weekend, we still saw enough Spears, and he was effective enough to make him worth using in a deep PPR league. But to me, you have to be pretty desperate, honestly. I'd rather just have neither of the Titans backs on my roster, but if you really need someone to start, then I think Spears is a viable option if he's available, and he is in quite a few leagues. As for stashes, I mean, Tyler Algier, you've heard me talk about a lot. If we see a Bijan Robinson injury, he's going to be great. Same thing with Blake Corum, losing touches to Kyron Williams. But if Williams goes down, all of a sudden Blake Corum is going to be a league winner. Bashal Tutin's an interesting one. Got a lot more touches relative to Travis Etienne last week and then got injured. So it's hard to know what that's going to mean and how that's going to look. Are they trying to phase Tutin more into the offense and see what they've got there? He wasn't a lot better than EDM, but it was one of his better games relative to EDM so far this season. So it might mean that he's getting more involved. He's worth stashing just to find out, even though I think other guys have way more upside, because even when EDM was a clear starter, he was still more of a low-end running back too, and I think Tutin would be even slightly lower than that, because I think we'd see a little bit more LaQuint Allen if Tutin was the lead guy and EDM was out. And Isaiah Davis, I mean, you need a Breece Hall injury, and then you've kind of got a running back too. But at least you probably have a very clear running back too with a lot of touches. And I do feel like that has its own value. Wide receiver-wise, and Jawan Jennings continues to be my top guy. He's the top guy for the 49ers in the wide receiver room. If you're going to own one of those guys, he is the guy I want to own. Same thing with the Broncos. It does seem like Troy Franklin is ahead of Cortland Sutton. Sutton's been a little bit more explosive with his touches, but Franklin's getting plenty of opportunities, especially around the red zone. Has more targets in each of the last 6 games or something along those lines than Sutton, and he's the guy I'd want to own for the Broncos. Does have a bye this week, which makes him a little bit less worth owning, but still someone that I think needs to be picked up in every league, and he's available in half, which is crazy to me. Alec Pierce, another guy with a heap of upside. With how the Colts have been playing, Pierce is a guy that I definitely want on my roster for his upside, especially if there's a Michael Pittman injury, and Pittman has been a little bit injured so far this season, certainly very injured in the past. Not a great matchup against the Chiefs for him this week, but long-term, he's someone that I want to have because I feel like there's the sort of upside that I want to use, especially if I'm playing against a team that is going very well in a given week. And Jacoby Myers did seem to be more of the number one guy than Parker Washington for the Jaguars. We don't know what's happening with Brian Thomas, but if we're going to see a little bit more of a passing game here, and we might in certain matchups down the stretch, Myers is going to be someone that's worth owning because we know that he'd go out of their way to get him, despite the fact his contract is ending at the end of this year. Parker Washington, another guy in that offense that's solid. He's been getting a heap of targets and out there a lot. If the Thomas injury continues to keep him out, both of those guys are going to be startable in the majority of leagues. Christian Watson, plenty of upside, but it's hard to trust anything going on in that Green Bay offense. They're cycling 4 wide receivers at the moment, and Jaden Reed's still to come back. So until Reed comes back, you can probably feel okay about Watson and Dobbs. Wicks does seem to be rotating a little bit with Golden, but they're all kind of rotating with each other, and some of the bench guys are also getting involved certain weeks. So it makes it very hard to trust Watson, but he did look good, and he's certainly worth rostering just to see what happens. Darius Slayton, if we get Jackson Dart back, this is a good situation. Even if we don't, realistically, you're still going to get reasonable value out of Jameis Winston. It does seem like this passing game is improving, and I think Slayton is someone that's worth checking out just to see what happens. And Luther Burden arguably has more upside than all of these guys, and is worth picking up if you've got the bench space and you don't necessarily need to rely on him starting. Burden has taken over from Olamide Zaccheaus finally to be the wide receiver 3, and does seem to kind of be on target sense, moving ahead of DJ Moore, who's been not effectively used downfield. I feel like Burden could end up in a situation where he's getting a similar amount of targets as Rome Odunze in certain games, and that means he's worth picking up down the stretch because he has upside. He's a rookie. We know how this works in the later part of the season. You want to be picking up rookies with upside. Speaking of which, Jaden Higgins, another rookie with upside, starting to finally get some more touches. Not a good matchup this week. I wouldn't start him, but I would certainly roster him. Michael Wilson, on the other hand, gets a great matchup against the Jaguars, especially if Marvin Harrison is out. He's someone that I'm going out of my way to get if I'm desperate for a starter for this week. Longer term, don't feel as good about him. I do feel like we're going to see a lot more normality after this week's crazy explosion, especially with Marvin Harrison back, but certainly worth picking up to see what happens. Cedric Tillman, another guy that is worth picking up. I really liked him coming into the season. He just hasn't been used effectively. Gets a really good matchup this week against the Raiders. We've seen that teams can pass on the Raiders, and I feel like that they're going to need to. If it's Shador Sanders under center, I feel pretty nervous about this situation. Dylan Gabriel's looks a little bit better of the two, which is kind of funny to say. But Tillman is certainly worth picking up just to see what happens. And if you need a desperation start, I don't mind him this week. And Dano Mooney, an option with Drake London potentially out. I think with London out, really everyone on the Falcons suddenly becomes an option. They've also got Michael Penix out, but I think that Kirk Cousins is entirely feasible. It could be a pretty ugly game against the Saints, but Mooney's likely to be the top receiver. He and Kyle Pitts, along with the two running backs, will be the main guys, I expect. And then you'll just get Kadarius Hodge kind of coming in there as the other guy that's hardly involved. So Mooney is certainly someone that I'm interested in that situation. Tight ends, and Juwan Johnson has been pretty good at the start of the season. He's kind of started to come good again recently. I think he's worth picking up if you're desperate, and I certainly have been a couple of times that it's worked out pretty well, especially given how that offense is going with Tyler Shock. Dalton Schultz, probably a slightly safer option, I think. Gets a really tough matchup against the Bills. And it's really hard to know what's happening with Schultz compared to the wide receivers and how this will look when Davis Mills isn't under center anymore and CJ Stroud comes back. Plenty of risk there, but again, another guy worth picking up. Theo Johnson, again, another risk, but if they're going to continue passing the ball and he's out there a lot, Johnson becomes a solid option now that, of course, they don't have Malik Neighbors and haven't for some time. The change in coaching staff could mean a change in usage for Johnson. And we saw last week that they kind of knuckled down and really made the wide receiver room very specific, with Wan'Dale Robinson being the top guy. And then they brought in Isaiah Hodgkins finally, and also Jalen Hyatt. It's possible they believe that they can just get those three guys going, with Darius Slayton, of course, coming in probably to take Hyatt's spot. That might hurt Johnson, especially given how much they're using the running backs. But I still think that Johnson has plenty of upside, so worth rostering. And AJ Barner, I've kind of been in and out on this season. We finally started to see him get it together. He's battled some injuries. He's battled not really getting enough touches. Those things finally came together over the weekend. I feel like he's someone that's worth picking up to see if that continues further into the season. Favorite kicker, Cairo Santos. Talked about him a few times. He and Jake Moody combined are a top 5 kicker. He just looks like he's lower down because he was out injured for a little while. Pretty accurate kicker, had a big game and takes on the Steelers. Assuming the weather's good in these games, these guys I love starting. Make sure you always check the weather for your kicker matchups. And Andy Borregales, he was a guy for last week that I used, and he was pretty solid. I'm taking him against the Bengals for sure. I think this is a pretty good situation for him. DSTs and the Browns take on the Raiders, who have looked pretty darn ugly, still being pretty conservative and getting sacked plenty, even when they are behind. And the Browns have been doing a good job of shutting down offense, despite their offense not doing very much. I feel like this could be a good game for Cleveland's DST. And the Falcons, solid last week when I talked about them. And once again, taking on the Saints, I feel like this could be a good situation for them. Finally learning how to get sacks now that they've brought in a couple of guys through the most recent draft. And I feel like that's going to help them this week. As for guys that you should be dropping, well, some of them are obvious. J.K. Dobbins, obviously out for the season with an injury. He's very droppable. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, I just would prefer to have Chris Rodriguez. I'd prefer to have neither of them, honestly. But if I'm going to have one of them, Rodriguez would be the guy. You'd have to be in a pretty deep league to be keeping JCM. Mari DeMarcado, I just feel like he's more of a receiving back, and I don't really see the upside there. I know he's had some good play, but soon enough, Trey Benson's going to come back. You can't start him this week. Probably won't even be able to trust him the next week because you're not going to know exactly what's happening. And by then, Benson's surely going to be back. Terrell Jennings was technically active but didn't get a touch. It's just hard to trust any player in that situation, despite the fact he got picked up by a surprising amount of people. Plus, Ramondre Stevenson is going to be back soon as well. In shallower leagues, I talked about the Titans guys. Tony Pollard, they need to really be winning for him to be particularly effective, or he needs to rip off some big runs. He's only getting a good 10 runs a game, and that's just not enough. In a shallower league, you can do better. I don't really want him or Tajay Spears, but at least in a deeper league, Spears makes sense. Pollard, you're not dropping in a deeper league, but you suddenly don't feel good about him. Trooper Hubbard, it's clearly Rico Dowdle's backfield here. Hubbard is someone you can drop in a shallower league. In a deeper league, you keep him for the fact that potentially Dowdle might get injured and suddenly it's Hubbard's backfield again. Kyle Manangai, I think it's pretty clear DeAndre Swift has taken back over. In a shallower league, Manangai doesn't offer you much other than the possibility of touchdowns from the goal line. On the rare touches he gets. In a shallower league, you're not excited by that. We're talking like a 10-team league in that situation. In a deeper league, certainly hold on to him and use him as a bye-week filler if you need. Rashad White, similar situation. In a PPR league, he's actually still a solid option because he's still getting a lot of the receiving work. But we know that Bucking Irving will be back soon, and that's just going to make it uglier for White. In a shallower league, can near definitely do better. He's unlikely to be a top 25 running back. And in a 10-team league or better, usually only starting guys who are top 20, top 25 if your team's even solid and you're thinking about playoffs. Wide receivers, we talked about injuries. Travis Hunter's got one. Calvin Ridley's got one. Keon Coleman doesn't have one, but he can't get to meetings on time, so he's not even playing. I expect he'll be back, but he's been someone I've been talking about dropping for a while. He's been such a disappointment because I was a massive fan of his coming out of college. Marquise Brown just isn't getting used. Even Xavier Worthy's not getting used enough. You just can't trust the Chiefs receivers, especially in their numbers 3, 4, and 5. Because we're seeing Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster and Tyquan Thornton shuffled. One or two of them will make a big play each week, and they're fine for DFS, but I'm not using them in leagues. Marvin Mims, likewise, more of a returner these days. Really hope something would happen with him this season, but it seems like Pat Bryant's clearly got that number 3 role now, and Troy Franklin and Cortland Sutton are the top 2 guys, so that leaves Mims out in the cold. Olamide Zacchaeus has had some good weeks. He has been the slot wide receiver 3 guy for the most part, but Luther Burden clearly took that over this week, and I expect that to continue. In a shallower league, Rashid Shaheed, I just don't really want to wait to see whether he's going to be the number 2 or not. It seems to be Cooper Kupp at the moment. Torrey Horton's going to be back, which means Shaheed might even fall to number 4 and be used more as a return guy. I don't trust this situation. I think there's better options out there in shallower leagues. And Tess Johnson, likewise, there's better options out there. Chris Godwin looks close to coming back. Mike Evans will at some stage, and Johnson isn't trustworthy even when he is playing and the other guys aren't around. So in a shallower league, drop him. In a deeper league, definitely hold on just to see what happens. Quarterbacks, and Justin Fields has lost the starting job to Tyrod Taylor again. You can definitely drop him even in a Superflex league. Same situation with Michael Penix, who is injured, definitely droppable. Mariota, on the other hand, not dropped by his team, but Jaden Daniels will be back soon. He's got a bye this week and then some really tough matchups, and he hasn't been great of late anyway, so I'm dropping Mariota in most leagues. Luke Musgrave lost the starting job to John Fitzpatrick. Whether that changes back this week, I don't care because it's just not that valuable. And all the Steelers tight ends thought they might have a good game this week against the Bengals, given that's a great matchup. They didn't. Darnell Washington kind of did, but you can't trust which of those 3 is going to be used, so they're all droppable. Shallower leagues, and Sam Darnold's had a couple of really poor weeks. I don't trust him. He's got some tough matchups coming up. You can do better. JJ McCarthy, I had high hopes for. It just hasn't really come together, and I don't see a good matchup coming for a while, so you can probably do better. Certainly in a shallower league, you can. And TJ Hawkinson, I mean, it's just been ugly for him all season. I'm done with waiting. In a shallower league, can drop him. In a deeper league, just hold on to see what happens. And that's all we've got for the Week 12 waiver wire. Make sure you hit us up below if you've got any questions or on my socials, and please like and subscribe. Look forward to chatting to you guys next week on the Fantasy First Down.